What I wanted to offer you this evening is an introduction to something called the Enneagram, and also a course that I'll be running later on in the month of June, which is built around that, called the Self-Mastery Intensive. So I have, now I'm jumping between, okay, so now I have the, okay, does that work? Yay, okay. So, there might be a lag for you to catch up by the looks of things. So, okay. So I entitled the webinar Personality, Identity and Consciousness. So I think this is a particularly interesting topic at the moment, because the more people I speak to, the more I find that there is people around who are feeling that there's something missing in their lives, that they've got answers to, well, that they're looking for answers to questions, that they're feeling as though they're slightly lost, they don't know what to do. There's a lot of people, I think, going through various crises, so illness, ends of relationships, ends of jobs, issues with COVID, particularly over the last few years, and that there's been, I think maybe you felt it in the air, a shake-up, as if things have kind of been shaken around and brought to the surface, and maybe those things that have come up you don't know what to do with, and maybe you're feeling as though there's something that you feel like you need to do, that there's a sort of a deep calling towards something but you don't quite know what it is yet. Maybe you're feeling as though you've got everything that you really should want, maybe the job, the family, the relationship, all of the money that you're looking for. Maybe you go to yoga classes, you enjoy them, but you still feel like maybe there's something missing. In fact, maybe that's why you started yoga. You were looking for some answers to things. And I think, in my experience, those niggling questions that come up sort of in the back of your mind every so often, in terms of, is this really what I was put on this planet to do? Whatever it is that you do, whether it's in your family life, whether it's in your work environment, there's a sense that should there be something more than this, and again, maybe you started yoga practice to look for answers to those questions, or maybe you've begun yoga practice and those questions have arisen, and you've started to ask questions such as, who am I? Why am I here? Big epistemological questions that deep down we all have, I think, and certainly unconsciously, if not consciously. Is this all there is to it? Maybe you're reaching a point in your life where there's more years behind you than there are in front of you, and that we call that a midlife crisis, but ultimately it's a crisis of meaning, a sense that you're drifting towards perhaps oblivion, and maybe there's still music inside you that needs to be expressed, to be sung, like a song that you haven't written, or a book that you haven't written, or life goals you haven't fulfilled. Essentially, meaning that you're looking for. And I think certainly at this time, so I call this time in our period of human evolution the age of identity. And I use that term because I think we're reaching the point whereby the self-improvement movement have essentially influenced society to the point whereby Western civilization has become very aware of the powerful, or the power that the individual self has. We've started to focus more on self. There's a lot of focus on gratification of self, expressing of self, fulfilling of self. There's a lot of focus around mental health awareness. Social media has suddenly opened up connectivity around the world. Technology has increased to the point whereby we've got screens in our pockets, information at our fingertips. There's a big move towards focusing on positive things. The positivity movement, whether it's the body positivity movement or, again, focusing on mental health, positive thinking. And I think coupled with largely a rejection of mainstream religion and a move towards sort of sectarian societies, I think that instead of worshipping a deity externally, we've now started to worship the self. But the self that we're worshipping is the wrong self, because the energy that we're putting into our self-development, our focus on, shall we say, improving or making ourselves happy or contented, is really only satisfying the senses, and it's not satisfying the soul. So there's the focus on me and mine and myself is, I think, leading us, many of us, towards a society that is self-obsessed, narcissistic, image-focused, pleasure-seeking, and to go with that, we're bypassing the things that we really need to deal with and essentially missing the real work. So from a yoga perspective, this is avidya. So this is the ignorance of not seeing things clearly and essentially missing. I need to change my slide here if I can. Oh, there we go. Missed that one. See, I'm rubbish at using these PowerPoint presentations and flicking over at the right time. Waha, that's the one I want. Okay. So, so what is this self? What is this self that I'm talking about? Because when we talk about the self, we think about me and I and myself. But this is the little self that we focus on. The big self, the self with the capital S, is this is your soul. So this is your higher consciousness. And yoga practice, this is the Atman. So this is the individualized part of Brahman or universal consciousness. Inner being, the witness or the observer self. And in Sankhya philosophy, this is Purusha. And it's not something that you can define. And its very nature is such that you cannot give it a name. You cannot describe it, because it is the thing that is witnessing all things. So in Sankhya philosophy, there are those of you who might be aware of this, the universe is essentially divided into two categories, Prakriti and Purusha. And Prakriti is phenomenological existence. So all of the things that are in the world, including your thoughts, and including the word Purusha. So Purusha is that which is the observer of the Prakriti. So it cannot be observed because it is the one doing the observing. And so this is in essence what we call soul. And the self is what we're all deeply trying to reconnect to. And maybe certainly this is the mistake that we make through yoga practice. Well, this is the mistake that we make that yoga practice is designed to reveal, which is that we have mistaken the false self for the self. So in the search for returning to who we really are, we have mistaken the impermanent, which is things and people and thoughts and ideas and our body, for the permanent, the eternal, the divine, which is the self, which is, again, what we call avidya, which is the first of the kleshas, the obstacles, or the causes of suffering, or the obstacles to yoga. Let me just click across. So what is the false self? So the false self is, this is the avatar. So you probably heard of computer, you probably maybe played computer games, or maybe you've got children who play computer games. So the avatar is essentially a placeholder for you. And the false self is essentially the avatar for the self. This is the limited transformer through which the self experiences the world. So this is what we call the ego, created by the self. So it's first and foremost, it's worth mentioning that the false self is necessary. So the ego is a necessary thing. It's not something that needs to be vanquished. This is a mistake in New Age fields whereby the ego is seen to be an enemy. It's not an enemy. It's necessary. It's essentially the membrane that retains your awareness internally, in the same way that your body needs a boundary. In order for you to actually experience the world, your consciousness needs a boundary as well, a permeable cell membrane, which the ego acts as that cell membrane. So it's necessary for us to have an ego in order for us to actually experience the world, rather than just be a nebulous mist floating off into the ethers. Sounds wonderful, but there's no division there. So you don't get to experience what you would here. You get to experience everything. Whereas the joy here is that we know hot from cold, we know sweet from sour, we know wet from dry, and happy from sad, and that gives us the depth of experience that we have here in the physical world. So, so the false self is this is what we mistake, or this is what we end up giving energy to, rather than the higher self, and we get rather lost. And the mind, which is the primary organ that does all of this, has within it a component of making eyes. And by that I mean that the false self is created by the mind through its desire to want to identify who it is. So it's looking to find out what am I, who am I, ultimately to reconnect to its higher self. And it does that by differentiating I and you, or me and other, or self and other, inside and outside. And it does that by creating eyes. So we look into the world and we identify something as being either me or not me, or I dislike. Do I associate, or can I relate to this person or to this thing? Can I associate an I with it? And so the mind is searching for meaning and to survive by mapping the world, by reaching out with the senses, taking on information, and then trying to relate that information to other information it already has. In the same way that you have maps, physical maps and maps on your devices. All of this is so that you can start to navigate your way through life, so that the mind has enough information to be able to reduce its experiences down to a simple, shall we say, label or name. That's what language is for. So language gives a sound that we can associate with an experience that can allow us to be able to understand that on its simplest possible form, so that we can then begin to move through the world. And so the mind is essentially mapping. It's creating maps of literal maps in terms of like navigating around from A to B, but also maps in terms of experience and relationships, and how you relate to certain things, and what feelings are coming up. And it's building these maps to try to understand the world and to understand yourself in relation to the world. And out of this, the identity of you, your personality, is formed as you associate with things in your life. So, for example, we begin to falsely mistake the body for who we are, our thoughts for who we are. So, the mind might think, I am my body, I am my thoughts, I am my beliefs, I am my job, what I do, I am my reputation, what other people think of me, I am how I feel. So, we overly associate with how we feel, and it becomes so all encompassing that we start to believe that's who we are. We are those feelings. We are our pain, what we feel, how we suffer. Maybe we think we are our image, what we look like. Maybe our image on social media, status within society. We are how much money we have, or how much money we don't have. We are our possessions, what we own, etc., etc. And all of this is essentially mistaking the sense objects that we're experiencing as parts of our identity. So this mistake of avidya that I mentioned previously is essentially the mistake of seeing the map as being the territory. So as a way to try to understand who we are, we refer to the map that the mind has created, thinking that the map is the territory that the mind has mapped. So rather than actually experience the world as it is, we actually experience, essentially, drum roll for the next slide. There we go. So, rather than actually experience the world, the mind is constantly regurgitating its experiences, its memories, what it has learned, its labels, its conclusions, its thoughts, the pain that's been processed and the conclusions that have come out of it, and then projecting that out onto the world. So rather than you actually seeing what's going on, you see a tapestry of your own past, which is essentially the ego self, that's the samskaras, or the wounds, the conditioning. So we're conditioned into believing that we are this limited self. And as a result of this, we move through the world. Instead of experiencing things clearly, we end up basically seeing the world not as it is, but as we are. So when we have struggles and difficulties in the world and things come up, or we meet people and there's problems with somebody else or with the world, almost always we try to work out, almost always we miss the fact that actually rather than us being a victim of a circumstance, or that maybe we think it's somebody else's problem when there's a disagreement, that in fact it's our viewpoint and our interpretation of that is almost always the issue. Because we don't see things clearly, we see things as being biased through a filter or through a lens which is clouded by our own stuff. So the word for that, I use the word stuff, there's lots of word around for it. I mean, we can talk about conditioning, we could talk about trauma is also a word that's often used, although that's, can be used for things that are slightly more serious. But ultimately, our thought patterns, reactive patterns, feelings, all of this has been built up in layers as a way for the mind to try to understand the world, and we talk about it as being the ego. And okay, so let me just, this is effortlessly switching. There we go. Okay. Let me get back there. Okay. So, essentially, what ends up happening without us realizing is that when we begin to start doing work on ourselves, essentially, and maybe we start to play around with self-help work. We start to play around with self-help work. Maybe we start to delve a little bit into yoga practice. We start to question, what's going on. We can only go so far because it's almost impossible to see all of our stuff. I don't know whether you can. Has my thing caught up? Are we? Oh no, we're all a little bit behind. Okay, Zoom not being. You can hear me there. Okay. So there's this idea that the fish cannot know water, which is rather lovely. I'll read this to you, even if you can't necessarily see it on the screen. There are two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one looks at them. One of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" So essentially, a fish cannot know water because it's all it's ever known, in the same way that it's almost impossible for you to see your own stuff, or the stuff that you really need to deal with, because you're so deeply enmeshed in it, and because it's all you've ever known. And so you might make a little progress here and there with some therapies, or psychotherapy or yoga practice, but rarely do you go deeply enough to be able to really know the water that is around you and all of your corners, because without us, it's easier for us to focus on pleasure than discomfort. So when something's uncomfortable, we often find a way to avoid it, to move around it, to convince ourselves that we need to find a way, to soothe ourselves, to, focus on being kind, or not being angry, or being peaceful. And this is a lot of what the self-help movement has brought about, whereby people have focused on trying to get things to satisfy the senses. So like, feel better, be better, earn more money, get the job that you dream of, get the relationship that you dream of. So a few years ago, they released a video called The Secret, which was all to do with this. It was so much to do with your essentially material possessions and the things that are going to satisfy the false self, but are not really going to satisfy the soul. They're not going to give you any lasting meaning. And it's led us towards feeling empty, as if there should be more. And this is even true within yoga practice, which I'll probably mention a little later on. So the question then is begged, so how can I get to know about this false self, this identity, this personality, if I am the fish in the water and I cannot know the water because it's all I've ever known? Well, can we switch across to there we go. Aha. Okay, which you can't see. Okay, which hopefully things will catch up on the video side. Will they? What if I do this and then this? Okay, still lagging. Okay, well, I'm going to keep talking. Hopefully this will catch up. So this is where the Enneagram comes in. So I discovered the Enneagram, I discovered about more than 20 years ago now, about the same time that I was learning about yoga. And I've found over the course of my yoga practice, having learned about yoga philosophy and practice with many teachers in various parts of the world for many years, as well as obviously daily practice and pranayama and asana and philosophy and chanting and meditation and so on, I have never found anything that can touch the corners of your inner being deeper than the Enneagram. The Enneagram talks about you, or the wisdom of the Enneagram talks about you in such a way that it knows you better than you know yourself. Now, I talked about maps earlier in terms of the mind mapping the terrain, and ultimately you're only as good as your map in terms of navigation. And the Enneagram essentially offers a universal map of consciousness. It is a symbol which has it appeared? No, it's not. Okay, so you can probably see that. You can catch the recording of this. If hopefully the recording of it will be with the slides in place. So hopefully the Enneagram will appear on your screen sometime soon. The Enneagram is actually a symbol, so it's a circle with a triangle in it, and then 6 lines that run across the Enneagram symbol. It has 9 numbers that run around the outside of the symbol, because it's all about numbers, because numbers are essentially the language of the universe. So the Enneagram essentially offers a map for you to be able to understand how consciousness embodies in physical form and how it manifests into what we call personality, or if you wish, the ego. It knows all of your blind spots because it essentially unravels all of the things that you never understood about you. And the way that it can do that is that it essentially explains how your personality was formed from a single quality of essence. Now, yoga practice is all about union. We're talking about bringing together seemingly opposite forces, or revealing them to be essentially 2 sides of the same coin, bringing yourself back into balance, integrating the light and the dark, the up and the down, the inhale and the exhale, the sun and the moon. And the Enneagram itself essentially is all about wholeness. That's represented by the circle that runs around the outside of the Enneagram. And it gives the Enneagram is a vortex through which your soul comes to become embodied in physical form. And the soul itself, as it comes into life, will have come in as one of the 9 personality types. Now, as soon as you start talking about personality types, you probably start thinking about psychology, which this is not, because psychology is putting humans in boxes based on their behavior. Whereas the Enneagram is essentially sacred geometry. The Enneagram charts the essential fundamental essence of who you are and what you came in to do here in this world, in this life. So you will have come in as one of the 9 personality types. You will have come in to explore one of these 9 qualities of essence, which is essentially what the personality types are there to do. And it's almost as though you are that the number or the personality type is a vehicle which your soul, yourself, has come in to explore both the positive qualities and the negative qualities. It's as if there's a facet of what it is to be human that you've come to explore. And each of the 9 personality types has predictable ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And that's because the Enneagram doesn't try to box you based on behavior. It explains why you are the way you are, because your behavior, all of your negative thoughts, feelings, and behavior come about as a result of a single fundamental driving need. And each of the personality types has a driving need which it's trying to fulfill in this life. So, for example, one of the types is the desire for perfection, which is an essence quality, which is that the world is perfect just as it is, or at least that's the quality of essence. And the one comes in feeling disconnected from that quality, and therefore the little human, feeling disconnected, actually sees the world differently than all of the other 9 types, because they have come in with this essentially like a filter or a vehicle. So they interpret the world differently to all of the other 9 types because they're seeking to reconnect to this quality of essence. And their thoughts and their reactions and their feelings are geared towards searching or finding perfection. And they can't see it in the world. They can't see it in themselves, so they go looking out into the world. And so the way that they interpret the world is through this filter. And as a result, they come to conclusions about the world based on their desire to get this need met. And they do this in their young years. So let me just switch across to the next slide, which you still can't see. But so there are essentially 9 personality types. This is 9 ways of being. So that's not to say there's only 9 types of people. There's 9 driving motivations. There's 9 ways of being here in the world. And there are many individual expressions of that. For example, you will find, to take a type 8, for example, the high functioning 8 and the low functioning 8 will be entirely indistinguishable. They will look entirely different from one another. You wouldn't be able to recognize they were the same personality type because of the qualities that they embody in the world. So when you see somebody who is expressing all of their positive qualities, they appear to be very different to somebody who's living through almost all of their negative qualities. And each of the types has essentially high functioning qualities and low functioning qualities, and everywhere in between. And the way that your personality develops is a combination of both nature and nurture. So when we start asking questions about who we are, like, well, who am I? We often look at our parents and think, okay, so I'm a bit like my dad, I'm a bit like my mom, but there's an awful lot about me that doesn't make sense at all and doesn't fit with any of those, any of the people in my life. So are we the way we are because of our genetics? Or perhaps you go the other way and think, well, I was a blank slate when I came in, and it was socialization and my parental environment that gave me all of my stuff. And so there's this debate between, were you like this when you came in, or were you made this way because of what you were exposed to when you were here? And the answer to that question is, or at least this is what the Enneagram offers, is that it's both. So if you imagine a seed and you come in, each of the personality types comes in with a seed in place, like any kind of seed. So think a seed of a plant. And that seed has within it potentiality. It has within it it's like a personality type ready to go. All of your potential, like the potential of the plant or the flower that's in the seed. But it's not the seed, it's not the flower itself. So it's not, a tomato seed doesn't have within it tomatoes. If you cut open a tomato seed, you don't get tomatoes. It's just dust. So it holds within it potential to grow into a tomato plant that will fruit, or to grow into a wilting tomato plant if the environment that it finds itself in is suboptimal. So the personality type as we come in, like the seed, so the seed that is planted, as it grows in the environment, depending upon the environment that it finds itself in, so it might find itself in an easy environment, it might find itself in a challenging environment, and that parental environment, not just the caretakers, but also where and when the person is born, siblings, etc., etc. So these conditions represent the nurture phase, whereby depending upon what we're exposed to when we're young, we go more towards the positive or more towards the negative. And just as in the analogy of the seed being planted, some seeds will grow to be magnificent plants, and some will struggle because of the environment that they find themselves in, but they will still remain tomato plants, even if they don't produce tomatoes. And normally the best way for you to connect with this in your life is if you are, well, particularly if you're a mother, and you've had more than one child, or perhaps you're in a family and you have more than one sibling. The mother example particularly is very interesting, because most mothers who've had more than one child will know that their children were very different right from the word go. In fact, they often felt in utero that they were different personalities, that they weren't just blank slates, and that they were and that the way they were then parented made them the person that they were. That there was something there which they had no control over, that you couldn't, that they couldn't necessarily explain. And this is what the Enneagram explains. It explains all of the things that are mysterious about human beings, why we are the way we are, why you struggle with some things and find some things easy, and why other people in your life find the things you find difficult easy, but struggle with other things. And so you will find things with other people frustrating. Why are they like that? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? Can't they be like this, or can't they be like that? Particularly in friendships, relationships, maybe work situations whereby you've got a difficult interaction, or maybe you're watching somebody on the television and you're judging them or you're commenting on them being like this or like that. And secretly what we're doing without us realizing it is, of course, we're projecting all of our own stuff. What we're really saying is, if they could be more like me, then things would be great. If more people were like me, then the world would be better. And what we don't realize is that different personality types literally see the world differently. It's literally like having a different colored pair of glasses or spectacles on, because you literally see the world differently. You need different things from the world. You think different thoughts in the same situation. If you're in the same situation with other people of different personality types, they will literally respond differently because their view of the world will be different. They may have more of a positive or more of a negative view of that. Your conclusions will be different. And yet, if you're with somebody with the same personality type, you will find you have far more in common than you think, than you realize, because most of us think there's, nobody's really like us. But in fact, that's not true, because there's only a certain number of ways that we can get our needs met. And this is what the Enneagram outlines, which is not just trying to put us in a box like another typing system, but it explains why you are the way you are. So why do you have those thoughts like that? Or why did you find this pattern of relationships difficult? Why did you always fight with your mother when you were little and you got on better with your father? Or why do you find that you love to work with people and you find it difficult to be on your own? Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you find being around people really challenging in social situations and you prefer solitude in your own space. Each of the personality types together, all 9 together, makes up the rich wholeness of what it is to be human. And each of us has come to explore something different. So there's none that are better than the rest. Everybody has gifts that they can bring to the world. And they are essentially, personalities are essentially a facet of a diamond of wholeness expressed in human form. So, just as I was saying, each personality type has a fundamental driving need. When you discover what your personality type is, and the way that you do this is you start to drill down into what you're driving, what you really want in the world. And it won't be what you think. So it almost certainly won't be love. It may be. One personality type wants love more than anything else. But there are other personality types that will exchange, for example, security and safety for love, or status for love, or power or freedom for love, or peace. One type prefers peace to love. It doesn't mean that we don't all want love and to be loved, but in the end, there is a bottom line for each personality type where there's one thing that they most want. That's what they most seek out into the world. And our behavior strategies, the jobs that we go into, the relationships that we end up in, the friends that we spend time with, what we do from the moment we wake up to when we go to sleep, is designed to try to get this need met. And when we start to understand that, you start to see why you're maybe you find this thing difficult at work, or maybe we've all got these self-defeating patterns that stuff which constantly keeps coming up. But we have these patterns. Maybe it's in a relationship, or maybe it's a negative thought that you keep, that keeps coming back. That you don't necessarily know where it comes from. You've just got this internal dialogue that keeps saying the same thing over and over again. And we're stuck in these grooves because the conclusions that we've come to when we're little, and this is where most of our personality stuff comes from, is when we're little, which is our formative years, as the psychologists would say, comes about as a result of us not having the resources to deal with a situation in a healthy way. And so we experience strong feelings and we have associated thoughts, probably negative thoughts around them, conclusions that we've drawn. And instead of actually metabolizing that experience, fully feeling the thoughts, maybe talking through the, whatever the issue was with the people around you, you come to conclusions about the world based on your misperception as your personality type. And so the thoughts that come up that start when you're young get entrenched in as beliefs that then continue to drive your behavior as an adult. So your adult behavior, the stuff that trips you up, causes you pain and struggle, is as a result of the childhood pattern. It's like there's a little part of you that's frozen in time, a little bit of you that's frozen, and it's screaming and it's in pain, and then something happens and it triggers you, and instead of you actually being able to see that happening, you're that little child again, and those thoughts come up because that's what you've always thought. You've always had those limiting beliefs, even though they're not true anymore, or even though they haven't been true for a long time. But those belief systems that you picked up when you were young are still driving you as an adult, including the ones that you don't think have anything to do with any kind of conditioning. And this is where the Enneagram comes into its own, because the Enneagram can literally know you better than you know yourself, because it sees your blind spots because they're predictable. So when you learn about your personality type, well, first of all, what often happens is other people's personality types are really interesting. Like, oh, that's my dad, or that's my mum, or oh, that's the person at work. Oh, now I understand why my boss at work is so difficult to deal with, because she's an 8 and she's behaving like this. And it's immediately, as soon as you start to understand their patterns, you start to, instead of trying to change them or judge them, you start to understand why they are the way they are, and you can suddenly start to make different choices. First of all, you can be more compassionate, but second of all, you can then start to use different strategies to talk to people or to interact with them, because people respond, different types respond differently depending upon how you interact with them. Some types, so some types are naturally more gregarious, some types are naturally more withdrawn, some types are naturally more cerebral, others live their life through their emotions, others are very instinctive and bodily orientated. And for example, if you're a parent and you've got more than one child, you've got, and you've almost certainly got 2 different personality types. And if you try to parent them the same, the chances are you'll get very different results, because some types need more love and attention and appreciation and strokes. Other types need more discipline. Other types need more freedom. Other types need more privacy and space. And if you're giving, and what we tend to do without us realizing is we tend to try to give to other people what we would want. So if the thing that we want is to be safe and secure, and to have enough money in the bank, and to make sure the mortgage is paid on time, and to have a steady job, and basically to try not to worry about things, and try not to bother and try not to bother people, that's exactly what you will give to other people. And if what you need is other people to appreciate you for the things that you've done, and to tell you that you're loved and valuable, and to interact with you, to ask you how you are, that's what you'll give to other people, but B, that's what you will want to receive from other people as well. And so if we don't understand that other people are different from us and we need different things, we end up in situations where in relationships, you've got 2 essentially small children yelling at each other through adult bodies, basically wanting to try to get their needs met, but without realizing it that the other person is doing exactly the same thing.
And when you can understand, for example, what personality type your significant other is, you can understand all the difficult things in your relationship, like why you argue about this and you get on about that, or why he's like this in these situations, or she's like this in these situations. And consequently, you start to see the stuff that is almost impossible to see from the outside because you're inside of it. So that's the fish in the water analogy again. So, so our childhood patterns, which manifest as an adult in the way that we behave when we try to get our needs met, is constantly obscuring the soul, trying to guide you in the direction of essentially reconnecting with your true self. So we get trapped in the negativity of our personality without realizing it, because we're when we really start to question these fundamental axioms of who we are, it's extremely challenging. And in fact, it's like the question is that many of us ask is, well, if I am not these beliefs, if I'm not my feelings, if I am not my body, if I am not my morals or ethics, then who am I? Who am I if I'm not this false self? And so the shedding of the limiting patterns of the false self, which is what this work is all about. It's about identifying the things that are holding you back, that are causing you to do the same things over and over again, expecting different results, but experiencing pain and suffering as a result of it, without realizing how it can be different. So how other people can be different. How you can be different. And so as a result, because this is what you start to find, instead of you trying to change other people or the world, you realize that, as Gandhi said, you can become the change you wish to see in the world. When you change yourself, or you work on yourself, and you literally work on the self. So you work to access the self by unpicking the false self. And you unpick the false self after you've identified, okay, all of this stuff in my personality type, I can see it now. Like it's like receiving your guide. It's like receiving a user manual for who you are, but like many decades after you probably could have really found it useful. And suddenly you can flick through the user manual. You can see, like, now I understand, like, why I keep doing that thing, but I don't seem to be able to change that pattern. It's because I'm a 3 or because I'm a 7. And I'm still trying to change other people, or I'm still trying to chase things, or I'm still trying to chase pleasure rather than happiness, which is what so many of us do. We think happiness is fulfillment of the senses, as opposed to a deep inner connection with who you really are. And this is the work of the Enneagram. It's the work of trying to reconnect you to the part of you that you've been that has been fragmented, that has been, you feel disconnected from. So I'm just going to so if we go, okay, so you can't see that, we're still okay. So you can't see that right now, but what it says on the screen is yoga's blind spots. Okay, so I just want to talk about this within the context of yoga practice, because many of you I know go to yoga classes. Many of you come to our studio, come to my classes. With the sun, I feel like the sun is going to engulf me in a minute. Maybe I'll get a halo. Okay. Yeah, one of my side of my head's going white. Okay. So in my experience, so as 20 plus years as a yoga practitioner, and same number of years pretty much studying the Enneagram, I don't think I could have got to where I am with my yoga practice without the Enneagram, because although the yoga practice allows us to understand in general the the patterns of what it is to be human. So there's in yoga, philosophy, and psychology, we can use Sanskrit terms and names to identify components of the internal world. And there's various explanations as to, there's this thing and there's that thing, and this does this and that does that, and that's why this does this and that's why that does that. But it talks in very general terms, as if everybody is the same, and that everybody's and that essentially there's no room for individuality, or at least it doesn't talk about anybody on an individual level. It talks about everybody in general terms, which works for some people, but for many people it leaves them behind, particularly because much of the ethos around yoga is actually skewed and biased towards a couple of the positive qualities of the personality types, and it doesn't really leave some of the other personality types route to growth as there within the scriptures. And I say that specifically. So for the type 9, the type 4, particularly, there's quite a lot of 1 in there as well. But there's, for example, there's a lot of it's to do with focusing on being kind, doing good, having strong ethics, calming the mind, not being angry. Much of that is geared around a specific pattern of one of the personality types, and without fully exploring your blind spots and all of the negative stuff, that can just become another identity. And so the trap here is that yoga practice only takes us sort of, for many of us, sort of just beneath the surface, and it can become quite shallow. And you can start to work on things and you can start to feel a bit better because your body's feeling good and you're doing asana practice and you're feeling a little calmer. And then as your layers start to unfurl, stuff starts to come up. And that's when you often experience deep inner resistance to getting on your yoga mat or going to a yoga class, or you have a strong reaction in a class, emotionally or physically, towards a practice, a pose, or a teacher, or a studio. And often your immediate response to that is, oh, I should go and find a different class, or I should not go to yoga because yoga is bad for me, or that style of yoga is bad for me, or that's too difficult, or I should find something easy because yoga is about feeling good. And it's really easy to bypass your real stuff by just justifying it through yoga practice of, finding the easier path or an easier pose, not really challenging yourself, not really seeing your patterns. And by your patterns, I mean like your not such good feeling stuff. So whether that's physically, emotionally, or mentally, seeing those as being the problem. Like, if I could get rid of those, or I can avoid those, then I can get better at yoga. Whereas in fact, what's in the way is the way. So those poses, those challenging experiences where you get triggered in a yoga class, or feelings come up, or you go to a yoga class and you don't think it's for you because you don't like being physically challenged, or maybe the opposite, maybe you don't like sitting still, and you're like, oh no, I didn't like that at all. And then, so what you've mistaken, of course, is that you're seeking to satisfy the false self of feeling good, as opposed to dealing with the true self, which actually requires you to go into this stuff deeply and find out what's beyond it. And so the Enneagram offers you the ability to be able to see the individual path that will help you to take your route towards fulfilling that great mission, which you often feel like you have within you, but you don't know how to do it. Like, there's something within me which I feel like I need to do, but I don't know where to start, or why am I wasting my life, or surely there should be more meaning to this. So the Enneagram really goes into detail and zooms in when yoga practice zooms out. And used together, they're very powerful. So it's not to say that the Enneagram is better than yoga practice, yoga is better than the Enneagram, but whereas one zooms out and talks about things in general, the Enneagram zooms in and says, okay, so these are your patterns. These are how they manifest in your body, because they do. So all of your personality patterns manifest in your body. And then when you're in your yoga poses, you can literally feel your own stuff and it comes up. And so if you pay attention, you'll start to find some answers. But if you're not there long enough, because maybe you want to get out of here because it's uncomfortable and you don't like it, or maybe you don't come to a class regularly enough to really go deeply enough, then you're only ever going to sort of skim the surface. And of course, a lot of this ends up being what we call bypassing. And there's a lot of bypassing in the yoga world, which some of you maybe have come across, maybe are aware of. And a lot of superficiality where teachers or practitioners feel like they've got somewhere because they've achieved some poses. They can do this pose, they can do that pose. They're supposedly, these poses are supposed to be advanced poses, handstands, forearm balances, deep back bends. And rather than actually doing any deep work, really all we've worked on is that false self, and that we haven't gone into the place where there's any real deep work happened. So my argument is that the combination of yoga and deep self-work, and this is where the course comes in that I'm teaching in June. The work on the self is, in my opinion, just as valuable as the work that we do on the physical body and the mind, or at least superficially on the mind via the breath, in our yoga practice. So I'm just going to start to bring this to a conclusion. And so if you have any questions, if you type them into the chat box, and then I'll have a look in a sec and see whether I can answer them towards the end. So just to wrap this up, obviously this is quite a short time that we've got together, and all I've tried to do is really give you a sense of context within where this work fits within perhaps your own yoga practice as a yoga student, or maybe as a curious individual wanting to know more about how perhaps you can get rid of some of your negative patterns, some of the things that cause you pain and suffering and challenge you, wanting to improve your relationships, and generally to understand other people. Because when you understand about the Enneagram, and when you have the wisdom of the Enneagram, the world completely changes, because you can actually see people as they are, not as not as your projections. So you actually start to meet people, and because you can pick up very quickly on their personality types, which is not to judge. I mean, besides, judgment is not the bad thing that everybody's made out, since every time you cross a road, you have to make a judgment. So judgments happen all the time. It's about balancing things. So judgment is about balancing things. So you can be a good judge, or you can be judgmental, and you can be a bad judge, but judging things is not intrinsically bad. So you can judge whether or not someone is this personality type or that personality type based on things that they show you. And you can then start to get the best out of other people as well if you work with people, particularly your family as well. You can start to improve your relationships because you can understand the person that you're in a relationship with, rather than essentially loving them but not necessarily understanding why they are so annoying and drive you crazy. And you probably drive them crazy as well. So let's be honest, it's almost never just a one-way street. But because our life is filled with people, not least of which ourself, us, things make sense when you understand about the Enneagram, because it's like somebody has opened your eyes to a secret that you wish you'd known since you were born. You'll also start to understand perhaps why in your yoga class you like certain things and dislike other things. Maybe that you need to be following, that you really need to be doing more of this and less of this, or maybe more of a specific style, maybe a quieter style because you've got a very busy mind, or maybe a more dynamic style because you're more sedentary and stubborn and you don't really like moving around, but actually that's what you really need. Or maybe you need to actually get in your body because you study yoga and you practice yoga in theory, like the Jnana yogis. But really getting into your body is what you need to bring balance. And really that's what it's about, because when you understand where you're out of balance, you can know what to bring back in to balance yourself, to unpick to unpick your own personality patterns, to see through your own bullshit, if you can pardon the language, because the Enneagram will show you that in a way that nothing else can. So I'm going to check to see if there's any questions, since I'm the only one speaking in here, and much as you do, I'm sure. Oh, there we go. So, some people have typed things in. Okay, so okay. So if anybody else has any questions, please type them into the, or you can put your audio on. If you want to put your audio on, you can speak to me. That would be nice. Yeah, okay. So Lynn asks if the course is in person only at the studio. The answer to that is yes, it's in person. So yeah, the course is in person. It's not online. Not at this point am I offering it, although I do have plans to record the course and then offer it as an online course, but it wouldn't be live. So yeah, at the moment the course is online, but it's only 3 days, and it's 3 days in a row. So if you were to come down, you wouldn't have to come down more than once for the course. So yeah, it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the course itself involves teaching about, well, essentially it involves, I teach all of the 9 personality types. And so not only do you find yourself, but you also find all the other people in your life. And consequently, all of the things that never really made sense in your relationships start to make sense. And once you discover your personality type, you can then plot a specific route towards your own growth. And as a result, you can start to focus on literally on the self as opposed to the false self. You can see where the false self ends and where the self begins. So what's underneath the false self and why? And consequently, you can start to, you realize perhaps maybe, you've been thinking that being happy is to copy somebody else and be more like somebody else because you've seen, oh, well, that person's really confident and, extroverted and, I should be more like them. Maybe if I'm more like them, then I can be happy. But maybe you're not that personality type and you're never going to be that personality type. And you've got other gifts that you haven't perhaps acknowledged. And instead of you trying to be more like somebody else, you need to be more like you are, like what is deep within you, what you're here for. Because each of us as souls has come here for a purpose on this journey. We didn't pick our personality types by accident. We deliberately picked our personality type. And it's no coincidence that you have the people around you probably to push your buttons and to make you, to force you to look at yourself in a different way, to actually look at your own patterns. And ultimately this is, relationships are the pattern of growth. And this is what our yoga practice prepares us for, real life, which is being in relationships with other people, not least of which with ourself. So, okay, I don't see any other questions. Does that mean nobody else is here? Am I talking to myself? I could be. Okay, so, oh no, oh, hey. Aha. Okay, so Laura's asking, I see on your website you offer another course relating to the Enneagram in relation to Hatha Yoga. What is the difference between the course in June and this one you mentioned? So the other course, which is the Yoga of Relationships, is, or was, because when I tried to run it we didn't get enough bookings. But the plan for that was to build yoga into the actual course, as well as teaching the personality types with regards to yoga poses. Whether I'll actually run that or not, I don't know. It's the trouble is it's quite a niche sell, so I don't know. I've tried to run it twice now, and we've never managed to get enough bookings to run it. So the course that I'm running in June won't contain yoga sessions specifically, but will obviously you'll be able to ask questions with regards to your yoga practice. To be honest with you, you'll be able to join the dots yourself, and I can help you with regards to your own practice. So although it won't talk specifically about hatha yoga, it'll be about the personality types, but it'll certainly be a good starting point with regards to joining the dots between the relationship between yoga and the Enneagram. Hi Kate. A lot of information to take in. No specific questions to ask you. Fascinating. Thank you, Kate. Okay. I'm going to have a drink because my mouth's a bit dry. So if anybody does have any more questions that they want to ask, then please do. Otherwise, I think I've probably emptied my tank with regards to... there we go. That's the question. We're going to go back. Okay. I think I've rather emptied my tank with regards to speaking this evening. So if you are interested in pursuing this further, then please feel free to message me. There's still a discount on the course fee open at the moment, which will end at the end of this week. I'll probably email you all with some information if you're interested in going forwards. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. I hope nobody left us. I'm hopeful that this